I think I finally figured out an interpretation of Chainsaw Man's ending that satisfies me. It's pretty holistic in that it ties the entire manga together, and so to explain it, I need to start by laying a little bit of groundwork. I interpret Part 2 of Chainsaw Man in the shadow of Part 1, and more specifically in the shadow of Makima. Makima was the big bad who controlled Denji's life, who ensured that he could never enjoy the simple kind of happiness that he and Pochita wanted him to achieve. She killed everyone that Denji loved, and she tried to kill his spirit. Overall, she seemed like pretty bad news. However, I also think that Part 2 of the manga ought to shift our perspective on Makima to be somewhat more forgiving. By the end of Part 2, I think that Makima turns out to be like the lesser evil, and in some ways, she was the best thing that could happen to Denji, while he was also Chainsaw Man. And if that sounds crazy or outrageous to you, please understand that I'm not thereby calling her good or endorsing her relationship to Denji. I'm really just trying to express the idea that Denji was truly doomed from the moment he became Chainsaw Man, and as such, giving him a life under Makima's thumb was probably the best thing the world could hope for, despite how terrible and unjust she was and would have been. And here's why I hold this opinion. Makima's nature as the control devil was able to establish a level of order within the world of devils more generally. And without Makima's capacity for control, the world that remains after she dies has an inherent tendency toward chaos and collapse toward apocalypse. And no one has the power to rein in the devils who are sowing this chaos. I interpret Part 2 of the manga as an exhibition of this descent into apocalypse. Thus, at the end of Part 2, the world has entirely collapsed, even Denji is devoured by devils, and if anything, he gets a lucky break because Pochita was able to reset the timeline by removing himself from reality. Now, here's another layer to this interpretation. The reason the whole world was going to shit without Makima in Part 2 is because Pochita was himself the destabilizing force. Pochita attracts devils who want to unleash his power. And of course, Makima was no exception to that rule. But what made Makima different is that she could also do it without triggering global societal collapse. In Part 2 of Chainsaw Man, by contrast, we see what happens when the powers of the world, both devil and human, try to unleash Pochita's power without Makima's knack for keeping it under control. Here I think it's important to recall the big Nostradamus prophecy which drives the plot of Part 2, which predicts the end of the human world order and the rise of a new age of devils. My own interpretation is that Yoru and Denji are the main drivers of this prophecy. The apocalypse that it predicts is ultimately just a result of their big battle with each other, even though nobody in the story quite knew it at the time. Lots of people were trying to stop the prophecy from being fulfilled, like Barum and Lil D and sometimes public safety. But everything they did ended up just fueling the fire that Yoru and Denji were sparking through their fight with each other, and this accelerated the destruction that Nostradamus had foretold. The irony of this outcome is that only someone like Makima, only a devil of control operating with the resources of public safety and a national government, would have had a chance at drawing up a master plan to rearrange all the moving pieces of fate in such a way as to stop the prophecy. So killing Makima kind of triggered the end of the world. But here's one final layer to this interpretation. There actually was one way to prevent apocalypse without Makima. If Denji had just decided to quit being Chainsaw Man for good after Makima died, just like public safety had commanded him to do at the beginning of Part 2, then there would never have been a problem in the first place. The whole apocalypse was driven by the way that people want to unleash Chainsaw Man's power. And so if Chainsaw Man disappears from the world, never to be found again, you'd also never get any kind of apocalypse. And that's why, at the end of the story, the only way to reset the timeline and undo the apocalypse is to remove Chainsaw Man from reality by forcing Pochita to eat himself. The overall moral of the story, then, is as follows. The existence of a destabilizing force like Chainsaw Man requires a countervailing stabilizing force like Makima in order to preserve the order of the world. Without Makima, the world then has two choices. Either collapse into apocalypse, or save itself by removing Chainsaw Man from reality. No matter the outcome of that choice, Denji gets kind of a crappy life. But what else can you really expect in a world overrun by devils?